Okay, welcome everybody to the second iteration of our reading group on ECSA's economic paper. My name is Joel Mason. I'm Chief of Staff and Technical Writer for ECSA Labs company and working on the ECSA network with these wonderful folks here. Today's reading group is both for people that are here live and also for those who are going to be watching it later while they're jogging around some lake or maybe skiing. If you have, I just got back from Helsinki and you can ski there. So yeah, welcome everybody. This is really exciting. We're on to chapter 2 and on to the second iteration of kind of how we do this reading group. So as I said in the message on the Telegram, and please, yeah, you can join the Telegram if you don't know about it. This is something we're trying to figure out what the best way is to study together and how to open this to be a larger process. So as we're doing it right now, we're kind of doing the second time of starting off with kind of with mics and videos off for the first part, and then open them up in the second part. But I'm going to be on the chat, and please do utilize it, talk to each other, talk to me, and I'm going to ferry things through and interrupt these folks with what you have to say. And I know that that's I'm always I've done like a lot of these events, and I like to keep them like so that people don't zoom in and who can crash the party with their various screen shares and stuff like that. So starting like that, and then but always really interested in people's feedback. So so yeah, we've got with us today from ECSA Network, John Ballard, Dick Bryan, and Akseli Virtanen. And we're going to talk about chapter 2, from capitalist to post-capitalist economies. So yeah, how do you guys want to kind of begin here? I've got lots of notes on the chapter. And I know that this was, and I think Jorge Lopez will also be joining us as well in a few minutes. I kind of see this article or this chapter, both it used to be an article, but is it also true that this is also kind of bears a mark of Dick between like a kind of an ongoing conversation between you and Jorge? Is that this, would this be this one, or is that the next chapter?
Yeah, maybe later.
That's every chapter.
No, it's every chapter. Yeah.
And discussion is a nice word.
That's right. Yeah. Battle poetics. Yeah.
So should I just say a couple of things about why why it's written? Would that be useful?
That'd be great.
So I think if you were to think about this document as sort of a white paper for a token, it doesn't fit the bill. It starts way too far back. It may feel for people who are looking for the standard sort of white paper just a massively long run up, but it's not a white paper. It's a contextualizing paper leading to a logic. So the lead up is important, and just as last session's chapter was about what's the context of the world in which we're making our intervention, this is really what's the context of economic thinking in which we're making our intervention. And I think what's motivated this really is that in crypto, there seem to be people who are coming from systems backgrounds, engineering, biological systems, etc., who discover crypto and they're drawn by its tech, and they realize that they need to know some economics, or they need to apply some economics, and they discover Hayak, but don't really have the background, the training, the technical training to be able to contextualize what Hayak stands for. And I think, to state it absolutely up front, Hayak and this belief that systems of markets are spontaneously ordering and that they are intrinsically virtuous when we set markets free, whatever they come up with is the expression of economic liberty. That this has a dangerous social meaning. It's not a new idea. It's been tried over the last 100 years, and it invariably draws out a fascist politics. You know, the case we might go to that's most recent and most explicit is when the Chicago economists, who are culturally of a Hayakian bent, strongly of a Hayakian bent, when they go in to advise the Chilean government in the early 1970s and put the sorts of lines that Hayek's putting, it finishes up in military dictatorship and authoritarian politics because of the idea that the greater good is the freedom of the market, and that should trump all other criteria. So we've got to be aware of that, and for me, it was to challenge those people who come into crypto economics via an engineering and systems background, who think that if you get the machine pieces right, everything will work spontaneously and all goals will be met. That we've got to say there's a long lineage here of debate about these issues that we should be aware of, and therefore we should have caution about Hayek. The second little dimension that can be a point of introduction that I hope we can talk about is that Hayek himself sort of rises to some prominence, first of all, in what was called the socialist calculation debate. And this was a debate occurring in the mid-50s about socialist planning, Soviet Union planning. And Hayek, of course, had both the simple and in this context, the moral high ground position of condemning Soviet planning, saying it's inefficient, it's authoritarian, it's autocratic, it's bureaucratic, etc., and we need the market. But that set up a polemic of, do you have central planning or do you have the state? And they were the two ways of choosing. And we're saying now, hey, that's not the choice. You can have markets and distributed planning, and we need to talk about opening up that front. And I think the third area that we need to talk about, and that gets raised here, is that Hayek and that free market, spontaneous order economics starts from the premise that price is the source of information, and that what we care about in defining spontaneous order and what people respond to in their economic decisions are prices. And we know that prices are defined by reference to profit. So how can, the cost of a good or service you buy in the market is by and large because it's profitable. What's the value of a company? Well, it's its capacity to create profit. What's the value of a piece of capital equipment? Its expected future profitability, etc. So how do we then say we like markets because markets give communication, and I hope we'll be talking about communication role of markets. Yeah. But we don't want everything to be compressed to this thing called price that is defined by reference to profit. So how can we define market processes that keep the channels of communication, of information open, so that we're getting rich information about a network, complex information about a network, rather than just price signals that chop off an interaction and then start the next interaction. Price signals, resolution, etc. So I think they're the three areas that need to come up. What's the appeal of Hayek, central planning versus the market? How do we get beyond that? And how do we talk about markets signaling rich information, the economic media issues that I'm sure we'll get to? They're the things I'd like us to, that motivated this chapter.
And the economic intelligence, like what we've been talking also recently, that too. Hey, okay, that's Dick, thanks. That was really good, I think. One of the things, what I'd like to, I was wondering what is happening.
What's happening? After I was talking about getting slammed by some trolls, yes. You're like, oh no. Yes. Maybe we should troll other people's Zooms with this paper. And just like, instead of being like genitalia and things, it could just be this paper.
Oh,
exactly.
That's my contribution.
Yes, yes. But what I wanted to say is kind of but for me, this is in fact a really important a chapter, and there's a reason for it. That it's there, and that it's chapter 2 also, because it's really the kind of here we start to set the entire paper. in the sense that, okay, so now we kind of been hinting at it. Now we say it more explicit that, hey, it's the economy and its key conventions that are opening as a design space, so that we can start thinking these economic institutions and conventions like profit maximization markets as protocols. But then on the other hand, I mean, there are these existing protocols already, and capitalism has evolved like hundreds of years, and we are not in a vacuum. So we need to understand much more, like, better these capitalist economics, like, and what are they actually about? How do these protocols work? And then and starting with Hayak, like Dick was saying, that there are reasons, because it's his like a strange position in the crypto space, but it's also that we need to learn, or not only critique, but also learn like what has been thought. We need to like deconstruct and go into them and pick them apart in a very detailed way, so that we don't like when we start to design and talk about our protocols, we don't like accidentally just like slide into the same like self-evidences, same protocols which have been ruling our thinking about economy for so long. So that's kind of for me the beginning. Hey, we are designing here, and what does that mean?
Yeah, it's incredible. For me, like this idea of price as being a profit price. You know, I think when I read this, when this was an article, it wasn't expanded into the chapter section. That's the part that got me then, and it's the part that still gets me now, in the sense that I feel like it's the thing that many people struggle with even thinking at that level. And so I'm interested in what the communication strategies are to think about. There's a line, right, that this is not, like that you call profit price, or this is, the problem isn't having a price or having an index, right? But we just can even a lot of anti-capitalist or post-capitalist discourse would conflate any kind of price and any kind of index with the thing that we need to move away from. We have to, if we're going to get to care, we're going to get to sustainable environmental valuation, it's not going to be through indexes and prices. It's going to be this kind of turning away from that whole system. This is obviously saying something that's a lot different than that, right? This is saying, like, there is this part where
but then
we go to the you want to say something? I was just going to point to something early on.
No, I was just saying that, but you can't also, but the point in this chapter and how the dramaturgy goes is that you can't just jump into the conclusions either, but we need to kind of start from these, like we are setting this scene for us also, like, hey, look, we can't separate economics and politics. They are inseparable. That's how we are approaching, and then we're thinking like these economic conventions as protocols. That is what it means, and kind of we are putting it there explicitly to the beginning, and that's what it's, for me at least, it's very important, and it's like a particular stance that we want to take here.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and I think it's also great that Dick started out with Pinochet and Hayak, because Joel asked about how do we communicate this sort of dimension of capitalist markets as a certain set of institutionalizations which are structurally problematic for us, and also down to a single index. And I think seeing the rise of fascism and Pinochet as an extension of a capital logic is really an important part of the paper. I mean, one of the things that Dick says is, I don't know if you're quoting, I think about Mackenzie's notion of an engine, not a camera, but that the protocols of economics are actually not just simply descriptive, they're design proposals. And that
they're performative. They're
performative. So the institutionalization of those design structures, the implementation of them, which requires not only military, ultimately as in Pinochet, but in the U.S. context, carceral systems and the like, in order to make that index measure in terms as already set out shows the political dimension of that kind of economy. And I think that's really an important part of the intervention here. I still think it's worth holding as a question whether market is the best term to describe the
Sure.
determinant of this system of metrics. I know that the paper certainly invests in that notion, and I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I think it's also important to see what that heuristic of the market is doing for us and what problems it might have as we sort of think through at another level the entire project. But like I said, the engine dimension is really exciting.
Yeah.
That's
John,
exactly what I
that
was
would be a
gonna.
great thing to get. Sorry, that would be a great thing to get feedback on about this, the concept of the market. And I think it's something that the whole of this document, and it shows up clearly in this chapter, it struggles with to what extent do you invent new words, like prices and markets, that people attribute clear meanings to.
Right.
To what extent do you stick with the words and say, but we want to redefine them, we want to take them out of their context and give them a new meaning? Or to what extent do you just start using new words? And that's a communication challenge that it would be good to get feedback on.
Or even old ones.
Yeah.
I mean, I just read Fred Moten's essay again, The Turing Machine, which I'm teaching, and he uses the word commercium in there. And commercium we normally think of as meaning market, but it also means correspondence and communication, right? And so it's interesting that if you go back to some of the Latin roots here, I mean, I'm not like trying to do any Heideggerian bullshit, but if you go back to some of these roots, you see that they have other meanings imminent in their signification. And so we think commercial now has actually come into being commerce and economy in the sense that we think we understand it. But if you look deeper, there's a relationship of sociality, which is also present in the chapter and something to think about. So I want to just kind of earmark the term market as a heuristic, and I want us to test it. I want us to see if that's
Sure.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. But it's I also kind of been thinking the same thing, and for me, one of the words we use there is space. It's a space of exchange, and I think it kind of describes it really well. But it's also important that we take on market as a key economic convention, and kind of how it's defined there in the I think it's the next chapter or the 2.4 that what it is. But it's asked like what are markets? What are markets, and what is their relationship to society? And it's defined quite well. I think that what markets are, well, a market, it's a protocol. It's really a network protocol. It's defined by offer, exchange, accounting protocols that its agents need to adapt in order to operate as a coherent whole. So it's not natural. It's not some kind of an innate instrument of capitalism, but it can be, and it cannot be assumed. So it needs to be. It means that it can be also structured in a way that opens the space of possible for different kinds of interactions and economic objects. So that's kind of a way for me that it starts to open up. Okay, now we're talking. I see.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the idea of inventing new words. Because I think when I first read this, I guess probably it was a year ago, probably I first read it, and spent a while trying to think about, oh, so it's not a profit price, it's a different price. But then when I read it today, I was thinking, and this is something that Jorge, you can talk a little bit about, like, I like the part, I can go to a different part than this. It's when it starts to talk about more of like a market, like in the sense of like a bazaar, which we're also working on that idea for another project, like a market is not a place with one protocol, or maybe it is, but it's with where everyone is issuing, in many different ways and with many different socialities. And there is this section, this part of this paper where it says really nicely about how, oh yeah, this is not just about, if it's not going to be profit price, it's going to be everyone setting their own prices and their own ways of interacting, which is how they can then begin to take stake in each other's unique offerings, right? So you take a unique stake, and then you're able to kind of create like a background for evaluation of what that person is doing. So it's even that, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe it's not price in that sense, but I'm not sure what we call it, or market in the financial sense, but also market in the social sense. Right, in the sense that from a network perspective, it's very different. This kind of multiple valuation. I don't know, Jorge, if you have something that comes to mind about that.
Yeah, thank you for opening that line of inquiry, Joel. So one of the things that become really obvious when you're looking at the protocols, like formally, like, because when looking at the networking protocols, the shapes are not fuzzy. It's very clear where the delineations of the functioning are. And it is precisely as Akseli was saying, right? Like we can define it first and foremost as a space of exchange. And when we see this framing, the first layer in the protocols is that people making offers are basically saying so much of this for so much of that. That is the structure of the offer. So what signal is being propagated and communicated to the network, to the market, is precisely exchange rates among different things. So what becomes available to the agents participating in a market, first and foremost, is an index of ratios of exchange between all the different commodities or assets or goods and services that are being expressed in those markets. And at that layer, markets don't look much different than sort of like ancient sort of barter-like markets. But one of the things that become really obvious in the protocol is that equally important to a algorithmic matching system as it is for a community is about how is it that we increase the efficiency of that market. And by efficiency, I'm meaning very concretely the exchangeability, the capacity to match the offers. So if the offers are all being expressed in terms of this in exchange of that, this in exchange for that, it's actually a lot of informational burden on the system to try to actually perform those exchanges. But then as certain commodities start becoming more predominant forms of expression of exchange, it's very clear that the entities in the network are going to start, on one hand, noticing that when expressing certain exchanges predominantly on certain units, those exchanges are actually going to happen much faster and much more efficiently. That like the algorithm can match better the more there's a shared sort of unit of exchange, right? And again, the next layer, it's kind of emergent, right? Like the matching, it's very easy to notice that as predominant units emerge, the matching algorithm, it finds easier to start matching these offers when there's this mediating asset. It can basically triangulate. And then the next layer in this is like when there's an abstract unit. Like once we identify, we understand that a unit of measurement is nothing but a common reference point or point system to express those exchange rates among the agents. The next obvious step is like introducing basically that can serve just an abstract unit, right? So it doesn't have to be a real thing for the matches to start occurring. Sometimes the matching algorithm can do matches even though the actual thing that was in the middle doesn't get exchanged. For instance, I say, okay, I'll exchange this particular commodity for that for gold, and I'll change gold for that particular commodity. So the matching algorithm can actually clear out of cancel like the commons, so like only the edges get exchanged, right? So it becomes really, really obvious that these predominant units of exchange can be used only abstractly. So
Yeah.
then the next
They kind of supply a logic, basically, whether they happen or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, basically sometimes that thing with the matching algorithm that is being used as a common unit doesn't actually get exchanged because it gets sort of netted out as the matches are being done. So the next layer is like, well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, in modern terms, I mean, that's notional pricing, and then that leads to barter, right? You know, I give you my car for your camera because we both figure out they're worth about $800 each or whatever it is. And that's totally possible in contemporary economy. I know you're talking about a system which is actually moneyless effectively because it works the netting and clearing works differently. That's what we've been thinking about, and I think it's really important to sort of like see that abstraction process has already taken place to some extent, and so we have experience with monetary units and the ability to calculate exchange rates based upon some sort of fixed index. That's key. I just want to say one thing without confusing the issue, which is that's a market, right? Or even the kind of barter that you're describing is also a kind of marketplace. But can that extend, say, to something such as this conversation, right? Which is also a commercium in a way. It's a kind of fellowship, it's a kind of camaraderie, it's a kind of communicative process, which is not quite captured by the idea of market, right? And I think if we're really thinking long-term about the ECSA project, we're thinking about the way in which something as subtle as discourse and the imagination can organize economy. And I don't think we have to do all of that today. I just want to sort of earmark that this is the distance we want to travel. We want to travel between this process of abstraction and exchangeability to something that's much more fluid and discourse-like.
Yeah, and that's precisely what I'm trying to get at in the last layer, which is basically how is it that we can claim an alternative to a price framed as profit. So I'm kind of building towards that. And we must recognize again that markets already and offer matching already contain within themselves the possibility of claiming one of the attributes of money, as you were saying, like, right, which is like medium of exchange. The market themselves with the netting, right, the sort of it's the abstraction of the moment of first I paid you so many gold coins and then I got them back, right? So basically that is already being done by the market. So it just shows like that the medium of exchange aspect of money does not need to be that. And with that, we sort of cut one pillar upon which price as related to profit is being claimed to be like fundamental. We're saying like, no, it is actually not necessarily fundamental. It's all accounting protocols. And when you have access to a medium that can things like netting, you're actually taking away, or rather like replacing one of the functions of money through just basically information in the ledger. But that's the next layer, right? Eventually you can introduce a purely abstract unit that actually never gets exchanged. That is nothing but a reference framing for people to reason about exchange value. And is this frame on profit? No, it is not at all, right? Because is this money yet? Well, it's kind of money, right? In one of its functions, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to carry along all the baggage that comes with favoring a particular commodity, whether it's gold or fiat, and the constraints or logic by which it was put into circulation.
And would you say that that's the case because it's because these kind of the unit of account that you're talking about is something that has been kind of formed and popularized by the network. So instead of having to rely on profit as a kind of incentive, you have the kind of the conglomeration of the multitude in this case. Is that right?
No, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think this is really an important point. That's why I'm jumping in here because, I think it's important to see that the indexical process of the monetary system as we understand it is not something that just exists or emerges sort of neutrally, it's imposed, right? I mean, those protocols are engineered and they're instituted by not just banks and accounting ledgers, but armies and police systems and systems of juridical systems of private property, which, allow access or prohibit access. And that standard that we use to measure value, that history of that violence is implicit in the standard that we use. So to select,
yes.
so to select some other standard actually is a political move. And it's not just an artifact or an after effect. It actually has to be a very conscious engagement with another kind of practice and another kind of relation. And only through that conscious intelligence, right, through the commitment to a different system evaluation, which is a political and an intellectual process as well as an affective and emotional one, do you have the emergence of other kinds of metrics. And those metrics just get instantiated.
Yeah,
right.
I'd like to kind of read a few things from the
Thanks,
paper.
Jonathan.
Yeah, no, that was great. It's and with that, I am moving with it. I'm not cutting that off at all, but I want to bring us back to the paper also for the benefit of those watching right now. And that's this part, right? That I'm just going to read it here, and you can see it on the screen. This theory of markets and Homo economicus are less an attempt to describe society than an engineering effect to remake society in its own image, predicated on the assumptions of individualism, self-interest, and the universal aspiration of profitability articulated through predominantly market relations. And it has the template for the kinds of people and interactions it wants, and if permitted to run, it will find and train players to behave according to its model. That's it. It's powerful and creepy and feels true. And then this end one is great. In the era of crypto economics, we can describe this engineering effort as building protocols of social performance. And I think it's a very kind of wonderful, honest line there, because I think it's a great critique of capitalism, but then we are also calling what we want to measure performances as well. So we're kind of, I think, setting ourselves a hard task in terms of because I don't like feeling like the economy is asking me to perform, and this is very much how that feels. So I want to read the quotes from Hayak, because next, if that's okay, just to kind of.
Yeah. I was going to say that I also think that it would be beneficial to go through. I mean, there's some really interesting things what he's saying about the economic calculus, for instance, and how the spontaneous order starts to appear.
Yeah.
I think it's worth going through.
Yeah,
just before we do that, can I just say a couple of things from the quote you read? I think John's making, if I can speak, if I can invoke John's point, a slightly different point, because the prose there suggests the market has an interest, or neoclassical economics has an interest in configuring things certain ways. It is performative, and I think what John's saying, which is important, is we need to out the politics that has elevated this framing to the front, because not just that we're outing for outing's sake, but we're not going to change it unless we realize what we're challenging. And we're not just challenging economic theory, we're challenging a social order that has adopted economic theory and has elevated it to its preeminence. So that's
as if it didn't have any history. That's
that's right. Or that it is spontaneous and it's natural in some sense.
Yes.
But I just want to raise another issue that in this domain before we go to Hayek's way of talking about the mechanics of markets, and it's something that I think we should be concerned about, and I hope Jorge can say just a little bit about before we go to Hayek, and that is that one of the premises of this Hayekian analysis is that in the process of exchange, all parties are equal. They come to the market with their capacity to buy, their capacity to sell, and the interaction is an interaction between equals. And we know culturally this goes to things like the scales of justice that are really the scales of commerce, and all parties approach commerce with equal power, etc. Not that I want to get into saying, it's all about monopoly, because that too becomes a distraction about trying to describe the structure of power. But the question that I want us to get to, not right now, is can protocol design ensure that people interacting in markets doing the processes that Jorge was describing, can we be sure that they approach that process as, in some senses, as equal citizens with equal capacities? We can design it that way, but can we can design protocols that way, but can we feel confident that it will play itself out this way? I just put that on the ... for later.
Okay. Lovely. Did you? Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'll read some Hayak, that if that's all right, because I think that it's also what I really like about this chapter is that I really connect with a lot of things that Hayak says. I mean, I connect with things we say more, but I think it's very nicely placed because, and I'd be interested in hearing from everyone here today and elsewhere, other times, whenever you're watching this, about precisely that, and even perhaps kind of obviating the relation of Hayak to crypto projects, but also just as a person, as a thinker. There is something, and I think that relates to stuff around cybernetics, at least for me. I'm not a big cybernetics person anymore, but you can't really be into crypto without being a little bit into cybernetics in terms of that information stuff. So as you said, I think it is worth reading in its entirety here. So it is in this connection that what I have called the economic calculus proper helps us, at least by analogy, to see how this problem can be solved, and in fact is being solved by the price system. Even the single controlling mind, a central planner, in possession of all the data for some small self-contained economic system, would not, every time some small adjustment in the allocation of resources has to be made, go explicitly through all the relations between ends and means which might possibly be affected. It is indeed the great contribution of the pure logic of choice that it has demonstrated conclusively that even such a single mind could solve this kind of problem only by constructing and constantly using rates of equivalence, or values, or marginal rates of substitution, i.e., by attaching to each kind of scarce resource a numerical index which cannot be derived from any property possessed by that particular thing, but which reflects, or in which is condensed, its significance in view of the whole means and structure. In any small change, you will have to consider only these quantitative indices or values in which all the relevant information is concentrated. And by adjusting the quantities one by one, he can appropriately rearrange his dispositions without having to solve the whole puzzle ab infinito or in initio, or without needing at any stage to survey it at once in all of its ramifications. Fundamentally, in a system in which the knowledge of the relevant facts is dispersed among many people, prices can act to coordinate the separate actions of different people in the same way as subjective values help the individual to coordinate the parts of his plan. Right?
Yeah.
So that's saying that basically the time-saving mechanism, or also the partial knowledge relation, and then yeah. I'm going to just read. I just read this other one because I mean they're of a piece in a way. I mean, and this one.
You'll expand the text in your window to 200%.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Why don't you just get out your monocle, John?
Yeah, I know. I'm blind. Don't make fun of the blind.
I'm not. I just have to figure out how to do it now. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. All right, so here's the other one. The most significant fact about this system is the economy of knowledge with which it operates, or how little the individual participants need to know in order to be able to take the right action. In abbreviated form, by a kind of symbol, only the most essential information is passed on, and passed on only to those concerned. It is more than a metaphor to describe the price system as a kind of machinery for registering change, or a system of telecommunication which enables individual producers to watch merely the movement of a few pointers, as an engineer might watch the hands of a few dials, in order to adjust their activities to change. In order to adjust their activities to changes of which they never know more than is reflected in the price movement. So I just wanted to kind of ground a little bit of what we're talking about in that, because that's what the chapter does. It kind of spends a lot of time to say, this is out there. This is a way of thinking. And it's a way of thinking that's tantalizing for a reason, precisely because there's an idea that the markets are natural, that the spontaneous order, right? So I mean, I in a way, I guess I'm a little bit asking about, like, are you guys kind of saying that we can get this movement in this system of telecommunications without the profit price? Without something that kind of incentivizes everyone, because that's what basically profit does, even in the crypto side, even when you look at the way that Bitcoin functions in its even in its PR, right? Is that it's a kind of a perfect incentive machine.
Yeah, I would even say that if we think about the kind of what is revealed here is the kind of a language or grammar. So they're saying, all right, so price, it's a great this economic calculus. It's a great thing to solve the problem of resource allocation when information is complicated and dispersed and incomplete. So this machinery that registers change. So that it's creating knowledge about society. So it's kind of this index, which then coordinates, through which you can coordinate actions of separate people. So it creates this spontaneous order. So it's like an organizational device, like a coordination device, really.
Mm-hmm.
So what's kind of revealed for me here is that look, it's a language, it's a grammar. So everyone speaking this language of price plus pursuit of profit. That's the index of decision making and starting to act in a certain way. That's what's revealed. And when you think about it like that, it's just it's grammar, it's a language. We can also create different grammars. That's kind of for the direction where.
So are you saying then that this grammar is, it's not that the new thing that we're making is a grammar and this isn't? Is that this is a grammar and so is the thing that we're building?
Well, he's saying that that's like natural. That's the way these things. That's the way things are. We are saying it's just a set of protocols, and that's what is interesting.
Can I just drive a little bit of a point, taking advantage of the framing of the language, because this is really what I wanted to get at, like that underlying that grammar of price and profit, there's actually a grammar of exchange rates, and the choice of, or revealing it as a choice, right, as a political choice, that this exchange rate, the common denominator utilized in order to express this exchange rate has to be this particular commodity, has a political agenda being driven by it. So that choice biases the network into particular set of behaviors versus other potential choices, right? So what is important to reveal in order to do the resign is that we can call out what Hayak is saying as like the language, because there's actually something underneath that is a little bit more abstract, and that gives us room to make a different choice, and also to call out the current choice as just a particular expression of that underlying or dialect of that particular language.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, I mean, I know, Jorge, you and I have spoken about this many times, and I've learned a lot from you about this, but you know, that Hayakian model is an example of information compression, but which is also information collapse. So for example, you know, your widget might be a lot cheaper and the price is what you use to make a decision, but what's collapsed in that price, Hayak Crew space, you may never know the reason why a price changes. But if it's because people in a factory have been, you know, beaten to the point and starved to the point where they have to work for less because they have no other choice to survive, and that lowers the price, that information is lost, you know, in the price signal. And so the question is sort of like, how do you sort of open this economic signalization to other signals which normally are repressed or disappeared in the price index?
Yeah, look, I think also just to build on that point a tiny bit, Hayek is making a clever intervention here, because he's wanting to say, he makes implicit reference to Marxism, which is a misunderstanding of Marxism about value being embedded in the commodity itself. You know, that he's saying, well, it's not, you know, it's not labour time, or Marx is always talking socially necessary labour time, but it's a caricature of Marx, and he's critiquing it because he's saying, well, I'm talking about something social here. All these people coming together and interacting and making decisions of their free will, and it's a very appealing argument, yeah, in that sense. But the other thing we need to say is that quote, that particularly that second quote, it's important. It's a little bit out of context because it's important to say Hayek is not saying that price is the only thing that matters, and what John just said is an illustration of why it does matter. He's saying people will come to the market to buy things with all sorts of calculative instincts and intuitions, all sorts of reasons for buying something. So you don't just go into a shop and say, I'll have something that costs $10 because that's how much I spend. Show me what you got. You go in and say, I have all these calculative processes that have gone on within myself about incomes and tastes and prices, etc. But then once the decision is made, once I give the money over and it's locked in, it is recorded simply as a price decision. But we know from social media that a whole lot more information is currently being recorded than just price. Price is just the, if you like, the final decision that gets made. The browsing, the searching, the other channels of information that are being recorded and being acquired show a potential currently being used for profit making by social media, but it shows a potential to say that we can have what we could call market processes that also carry a whole lot of information that we want to take into the future, that will be part of building a network that is not just single index driven. And I think that's something that Hayek could have said, well, that's just bullshit because we can't do that. And you finish up then with Soviet central planning of masses of data being gathered that no one knows what to do with. So but that's no longer the case.
So you're saying in a way that like the attention economy as it's emerged through the emergence of the internet and social media is this is kind of what like the crypto company was saying was a possibility to create kind of other indices of value, and they have emerged and become. So in a way, if we're looking at what sometimes I try to think like, what is it going to look like as we build the things that we want to build, and in a way, is that a little bit what we're looking at? Not social media as it is, but the kind of arrival of other indices, other forms of interaction that then become popular, and then we will have an economic frame or system through which to kind of capture that or kind of write our kind of reports on how we think that transmits value, or that's something that we want to base kind of how we can circulate people, or do you know what I'm trying to say?
I think we're saying even more.
Yeah, and currently it manifests as surveillance, and we hate it. But because it's privately appropriated and used against us. But I think we need to be thinking about the rich data that is implied and how a network could be retaining this data to put it in a trivial ethical spectrum. It could be retained for the forces of goodness, not the forces of evil. And I'd sort of like to hear Jorge talking before we finish. It doesn't have to be right now. A little bit about what are the mechanics of a network preserving multiple data gathering processes, multiple social processing evidences, so that we're not just saying we can have a single index of price now measured by good criteria, by environmental criteria or social caring criteria to replace profit. We take one out and put another one in, but that we can maintain multiple measures and the importance of rich data.
Yes. Hey, before Jorge, I'll just reply to Joel here a little bit, because I really think that you were saying even more that you were suggesting. We're thinking that this is a new kind of a medium and it's especially it's a communication system, really. It is and this it's starting to open up right now here, I think, for the first time in the paper, and then when we start to go further there, it becomes more explicit even that it's really it's fundamentally a messaging protocol, economic signaling, and
Like not as a
that's
metaphor.
yeah, and it's not a metaphor,
Yeah.
and it's very very interesting.
And then
You have
that's why it's
tools
a
and
market.
expressive capacity to start to signal and coordinate with your own networks. Anyway,
Before Jorge jumps in, I just want to say something else, which is in the paper and this chapter in a way, but maybe it's something that will come out more strongly further down the road. But it's sort of like derivative aspect of these other indices. I mean, because I mean, the idea would be to create deviations, I think, from the profit metric, which become effectively options or possible wagers, or what we sometimes call spreads, where you could. You could wager your energy, lifetime, whatever it is, in a qualitative way towards something that wasn't necessarily profit, right? Something that you choose or selected that was valuable to your community or your network. But that's always going to be in some kind of relationship to, I mean, until the end of capitalism, right? It's going to be always in some kind of suspended relationship to what else you could have done with your time, right? So we're talking about using other indexes to create spreads, which I think of as, I mean, I think we've used this term many times, qualitative derivatives, right? It's a way of sort of organizing around a particular quality or value, which is not necessarily antithetical to profit, but it's distinctly different from the profit system. And that distinction between those two directions or possibilities for your becoming is what opens that relationship and turns it into a communicative medium.
Yeah, and that said here, combinations of information and propositions of their economic significance, what we call performances, come to the fore as the critical frontier products of the new economy. That's what you were saying, Akseli. They imply that giving information meaning, even competing meanings, not just one answer from the beginning, like you're saying, is the critical economic agenda for the future. This is about using information to create narratives of the future, which is a very exciting phrase. Yeah.
Authoring futures, yes.
I mean, this does lead a bit to the tick time, but which I really want to get to. But yeah, sorry, Dick, you had kind of posing something to Jorge. Sorry, Jorge. Please.
It's okay. So trying to sort of like create a mapping, a clear mapping of how is it that we can address all of these different aspects of economy that each one of you have been emphasizing. I want to bring back the focus on what Akseli was mentioning, that it's a new form of medium, right? And yes, a computationally mediated medium, which is important. Its capacity is precisely what is opening the redesign of certain things that, whether they were conscious political choices or just practical choices, it's again a different point of entry. But from a purely accounting and network protocol perspective, to free price from profit, we need to free markets from price, and that is the opening. Instead of thinking of markets as mediums of communication in which the signal being transmitted is a price, which already carries a bunch of design decisions, we're going to say that it carries an exchange rate. That is what I want us to like really take. It's like if markets in a formal sense, again, I know that these words are loaded, like and they like surplus and profit and all these things. But if we can say that if the mediums of exchange that we're speaking of as transmitting information can be understood as transmitting precisely exchange rates, first and foremost, not prices, then we can reveal price as an exchange, one exchange rate signal that can be communicated. And Dick is asking, I have several answers, two important ones of like, how is it that we can recapture those devices, markets as a communication device, a signaling device, into transmitting more and different information. Well, the first step is a that is not prices, it's exchange rates, and that the choice of a particular commodity carries or configures the medium differently, right? Like if we say prices, we're probably already referring to a state-backed asset like money, and the market itself is constrained to the capacities of that particular state to preserve the value of that money, the capacity of the agents to get their hands of that money in the first place because they didn't produce it. And a bunch of different, like just that little choice. Hey guys, let's express our exchange rates using this particular instrument. Then it has a whole ripple effect of systemic implications of the kind of medium that emerges, right? So what we're saying, hey, if we recognize this exchange rate, we can actually perhaps use different commodities to use that. And if what we're really doing is open a space for any kind of index or commodity to be brought in as something that like price and profit and money, because like price and profit, like they need to make reference also to money as we know it. We can bring other commodities and then design a system that says, well, it's none of them. It's something below shared exchange rate. So understanding this network as a signaling exchange rate signaling system is precisely what opens the possibility to use different assets as preferred form, and more importantly, to bring interoperability among them, which interoperability is we don't speak so much about that, but it is like such an important aspect of a medium, because basically it's what underpins and predicates what we often express as expressive capacity, right? Like in technical terms, interoperability it's what does that, right? And interoperability basically relies on abstracting something, having a higher level of abstraction, like exchange rate instead of price. The other aspect of bringing new values is precisely that we no longer in a computational medium need to constrain ourselves to exchange rate signaling, whether price or whichever other ones we choose. But the assets themselves can carry uncompressed information, because exchange value or exchange rate, I mean, that's what the market does, and it cannot do anything other than that. That's where it ends, and it's what it tops out at there as a signal.
The market or this market.
But then, yeah, any
Markets.
market, like market matching is like what makes a market is it's in a space of exchange, like what Akseli was saying, right? That's what it does, and it cannot do more than that at that level of definition of what market is, right? But we understand that in a computational medium, the assets themselves need not to lose all the information of like all the other indices, all the other processes, all the other derivatives of which they are part of, can be carried as part of that. So the next sort of layer that brings this a more multifaceted value communication system is not the market layer, right? It is the what we're calling like the economic token layer, right? Which is like this. It's looking at the tokens as containers, as windows that can be open and expand into like richer information of the network, whatever that is, and as designable, programmable.
Assets.
Assets?
Assets, yeah. That's a nice photo. Take a photo, man.
Yeah, let's take bets on what the last line is going to be.
Yeah, but that was really.
We lost your last word, Jorge, but we were all filling in.
Yeah.
What was the last
Hey,
one? Assets?
Can I just fill in there for a second? And I hate to get jockish about this and sporting analogies, but maybe a sporting analogy is that games, contests have to have winners and losers. There has to be the whistle has to go at the end, the siren has to go at the end of a game, and a winner will be recorded. That's the market equivalent. But there's a whole lot of ongoing data now about performances inside a game that carries over and assembles massive data sets about players, strategies, form, all that information that is about sports betting, that's not based on the who's going to win or lose the game, but about individual performances. These are data narratives that get built and are continuous. They keep going. But if you don't have the idea that there is a game that comes to an end that gets recorded as a winner and a loser, if you don't have that, the other metrics won't come into being, because they're all structured by that winning and losing protocol layer. Anyway, that's just my little analogy that helps me. It may not help anyone.
I was operating under the hope that there might be a win-win possibility there, so that when accounts were settled, sort of everyone comes out ahead, and that would be sort of in a distributed surplus of some kind. Which also
I was thinking more like that analogy is but like more like maybe the fact of being on multiple teams at the same time, and so losing there, winning there, and always, I think, the idea that by allowing everyone to diversify their risk exposure, that the losing that happens is something that can be undertaken in a way that doesn't lead to death or not being able to pay rent, or like just softening the overall bluntness of the instrument through
before we settle the score. I just want to go back to something that Jorge was saying about the commodity token, or the tokens carrying a lot of information, complex information, which ordinarily gets lost in market operations, because it's as if they have within them ledgers, and so they can be tranced. They could actually carry with them, in a way that most commodities cannot in current market, their histories, right? And so by actually having a legible history of basically the meaning of this digital object, or that signifies some other set of relationships, you can have a different read of that, and therefore value it differently. And that sort of information richness is profoundly important.
Yeah, I was even thinking, maybe we could share a little bit like what we've been thinking also recently, like what are the consequences, like what does this new medium actually allow to do? What kind of new capabilities do users might get? I think that might be also really interesting. I could maybe share the screen quickly, or shall we go to the last chapter? That's interesting too. I'm just thinking like this new kind of asset, new kind of a token.
Well, I think maybe it could just be said like, framed within can you frame it within this chapter in that sense, like that? For like things that are got, and if we have different indices and a different unit of account.
Yeah, I can bridge it just a little bit, rather to opening it, just bring it to that and connecting it with what Jonathan just said, that because I agree that information richness in keys is key. And in practical terms, having access to this rich information, basically they and it's kind of supporting Hayak without like buying onto the and it has to be price, money, profit, is that when the user is able, or the market player, let's call it in this case, or the trader it can see this richness of information, it can better perform its role of converting a multitude of subjective values into exchange rate or exchange value, right? So because now there's different ways to take into consideration to valuation, other than which one is cheaper or which one is the more expensive, right? Like there's a better capacity to evaluate the particular value of that particular token, right? So it is a process on evaluation, and the richer the information it holds, the better the decision that can be made. And again, I'm using this word decision deliberately, because that we need to be able to trace that moment of evaluating the information contained in that particular token into exchange rate as the unit of decision making, and therefore a dimension of governance that's going to come later of this particular system, because it also opens that this is a governance system, right, with different mode, different logic of decision making, different properties. So that's what I can say, Akseli, is just like basically the capacity to express richer information, which this token is like one of the superpowers that we're bringing to the edges on the network, right? So
Yes.
It's basically taking away this agency only from, you know, like the privileged agents, whether states or banks, of like projecting analytics into their particular unit of count or the preferred device of exchange a particular market, and giving that to everyone. And we wish much more diverse array of values than those players. And what I want to emphasize is not, it's also the reason this is possible right now is because we have a much more powerful medium, and we can also understand that particular kind of privilege, it's also a pragmatic one. It's one in which, like, being able to perform that activity and have those rights and those privileges take huge informational overhead and administrative overhead that is not available to everyone in all legacy systems, but all of a sudden become available in these new computational mediated systems. So yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so like I said, we've been like starting to list now, I think pretty clearly now, that kind of this new, and then empowers really new capabilities that this medium can like give its users. Yes, very interesting.
Yeah, some of the questions that I have relate further down in the chapter. I don't know how long we want to go today. We also, I think we can open it up a little bit to other folks and that are here today as well. But they were related to the illiquidity and also to time. These are two, like, when we start to get into what's actually offered, and I was thinking that's also a bridge to what could a network offer. You know, how could it do a market without spontaneous order, which is to say with more collective input as to what makes that order. And what seems to be suggested in the chapter is that not being tied to linear time is one, and not being tied to the assumption of liquidity. Are either of those questions kind of ones that tee up something interesting from where we're going right now?
I think both of them, that in the writing of that chapter, they're both sort of little add-ons for that in that specific chapter, because they're really signaling issues to follow. So really the liquidity issue is trying to say spontaneous order always assumes there's a market, and so we don't need to worry about whether liquidity is an issue. But we know in the time since Hayak, since the 1950s, indeed since the time of the death of Hayak, illiquidity has become the overwhelming issue of economic and indeed social policy. We can see in the last 15 years, and especially the last 3 years, how much public funding has been pumped in to guaranteeing liquidity to financial markets. And the state will now be saying we can't afford public housing, we can't afford education, because we've got to keep that quantitative easing, we've got to keep buying these assets to keep the liquidity going. So it's a little signal to us to say we can't assume liquidity exists, and that's our opening to talking about all agents' capacities to be issuers. That liquidity is something that gets endogenously generated within a network. It doesn't rely on a central bank. And the other thing about time is not saying we're going all hippie on everyone and saying, who gives a fuck about time? We just do it when we like. It's a way of saying, that profit and contemporary finance are all time-defined measures. It's the rate of return over time. And what we want to do, taking the attention of time, is talking about events. So we want to take the focus, put the focus on the creation of units of output, and that the mechanism that will drive this economy is saying there's another unit of value and another unit of value and there's another unit of value. So that we're not saying, you know, every 30 seconds a unit of value is created and the 30-secondness is what's critical. We want to put the focus back onto the creation of the commodity or the output, whatever it may be. So that sort of reconfigures clock time as a subordinate issue to output time or tick time. And people will say in financial markets, the best modeling that's happening in those markets is where financial events are measured in tick time. You get the best data sets, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert here, but you get the best predictive models when you calculate things in event time or tick time, not when you calculate events by a clock cycle. So really, these are just signaling issues for the future that are going to drive our analysis, and they should, in this chapter, I think, be taken in that light. We'll be back to them in subsequent weeks.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, one of the things I connected with this stuff around tick time as event-based, and has also been a place where you can value patterns or repetitions, is that in how we think about network structures of offers of agents, a network building value is that it's easy to imagine, you know, packages of potential events becoming more valuable. You know, the more we build on each other's offers, the more the whole thing becomes valuable, but it also values each one's individual issuance as well by participating in something that the whole network is, or a certain amount of the network is backing.
I think it's important for ourselves and also maybe for our listeners to be aware that even as we're attempting to instantiate other forms of other temporalities, you know, say my soporific poetics network had very slow tick time because we spent a lot of time, you know, contemplating and didn't like really interface as often as, you know, others did. In the background, capitalist time would still be running, right? And so this temporal sort of strand would have some sort of relationship to capitalist time, which would be perceptible to us. We could feel that we were like in one time or another. And that's kind of like, that's kind of an effective image of what the spread feels like, right? By being in another timeline, by being in another sort of potential history, I'm putting time here where it might otherwise, there might be demands from the market, the existing capitalist market on my time. And I have to figure out how to create life in this other timeline, which I can maintain partially, even as this other, as the capitalist timeline continues.
Yeah. In Australia, you know, late 19th century, early 20th century, in the colonization process of Indigenous communities, you can see photos of massive towers with clocks on the top, sort of like lighthouses, except they're transmitting time. Yeah. And this is a way of training the Indigenous community about how to be prudent, how to be Protestant, how to fit into new notions of time, because they're living by a different notion of time, and imposing our notion of time is clearly part of that colonization.
And this is precisely why, I mean, like, that's beautiful. I mean, it's horrible, but it's beautiful to point it out, because that's why we say at the beginning that there is, that we can't determine like the social end goal, or you know, we can't hang the new good clock. It's not that time. It's not 4 p.m., it's 5 p.m.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Okay.
I mean, just if we're going to go on this, I don't want to. If people, maybe we should open it up. But I mean, you know, Moish Pistone's book, is it called Time, Labor, and Social Domination? But it's very much about the capitalist imposition of standardized hours, because that became the means to measure value production, right? I mean, wage labor depends on abstract universal labor time, and if you can't measure the time and standardize the time, you can't measure the value. So the imposition of a working day becomes a very significant part of colonization and then industrialization.
Yeah, turnover is everything, and turnover only exists through time. Yeah.
Hey, Dick, can you repeat the three things from the beginning? What you said? Did we cover them? Just to remind me.
I'm not sure that I can repeat them. So that
No, it was the danger of Hayek, kind of that it's a package. With him always comes, you know, his the
central planning versus markets. You know, that dichotomy, that polemic that says either you're Hayekian or you're a believer in Soviet style central planning, and we want to take a position somewhere else. And I think the other one was about the one dimensionality of price. You know, that there are all these other currents of data that Hayek refuses to engage because he intentionally wants price based in profit to be the ruling social criterion of decision making.
Yes,
you know,
so different spaces of exchange are possible, and now remember the first one was the political one, really, that with Hayek kind of comes Chile, comes kind of and you have to understand it, that economy and politics cannot be separated. That's why it's so important to take this seriously.
That's
his origins as an aristocrat always come through, the embedded notion of privilege that he has.
Ironically, maybe not so ironically, but tellingly, you know, Pinochet came after Allende too. And Allende, probably people know this, but the CyberSyn project was an attempt to create a cybernetic, distributed economic reckoning system, which obviously the computing capacities weren't there, but it was still sort of the ethos at that time to create an economy similar to the one we're thinking about.
It's incredible, the pictures of the place, like where they set up in like some basement, right?
Control room. It looked like the Enterprise.
I'm gonna find it. Yeah, okay, it's incredible.
Yeah. Shall we throw it open?
Yes, I think so. Yes. Just let me
Can I say something about time and tick time?
Yeah.
So it's just like to sort of like when I speak of protocols, something that is really important for me that gets clear is how I'm organizing them is trying to reveal a map of functioning, and I'm not trying to make any political statements, even though they can be projected on. And this is what I'm about to say needs to be also understood that way. So tick time or event time is a similar move to understanding price bought as an expression of exchange rate with political connotations. Also, like tick time, it's a more abstract form for the system, the protocols, the medium of conceive of time as to open the space for agents to introduce their own. This connects to performance, as is inevitably connected to the way they structure their own temporalities. And without going to until later, this is trying to do how they structure the performances, what they mean, how they get recognized, and therefore how each like atom of performance in or performance event in an economic space performance builds up as connected but also disconnected from others. So there is no the same way there is no notion of universal unit of exchange. There's also, for the system to be able to express and encompass new temporalities, it has to have no notion of universal unit of time. It is that, right? The system needs to be able to do that. So that's what opens the space to new temporalities.
That's awesome.
Maybe we should add that to the list. New time, economic space time.
Abstracted. Not everyone.
Yeah.
All right, that's
Hey,
great.
John,
Well, yeah,
thanks for the photo. I love the chairs. They look really. I'd love to have a chair that's sitting with a little dial on the side to change the telly and put the kettle on. And anyway.
Yeah, well, Akseli was showing me the box that someone got from Kraken for being a part of that, and it had all these shirts and everything. And you know, we could have like a box that you get one of these like telecommunication chairs. Just an idea.
Texas swag.
Just arrives one day. Distributed IKEA. But yeah, that's good. All right, let's open it up. Thanks, guys.